You might think comic books are for teenage boys or single obsessive nerds who can't quite grow up. Think comic book guy from The Simpsons. But author Rob Salkowitz says the infusion of comic books into pop culture tells us a lot about Hollywood and the media. That the 130,000 fanatics who descend annually upon the Comic-Con event in San Diego can see past the costumes and A-list stars. And yet, it may already be the beginning of the end of this long-running series. If that's the case, can we help Rob figure out his next chapter? I'm Hanson Hossein. Welcome to Four Peaks. Rob Salkowitz, author of Comic-Con and the Business of Pop Culture. Welcome.
Great to be here.
And obviously we need to also point out that you're a faculty member in the program of the Department of Communication that we teach together, so I'm glad that you're here as well for that.
Absolutely.
So this is quite a remarkable book, and people might think, well, if I don't care about comics, I don't need to read this book, but to me it actually speaks to a larger picture about where we're heading with entertainment, culture, and media. How does it become more of a universal lesson for us as we're looking at those industries?
Well, I came to this subject more from the business side than from the comics side. Although I am a comics fan from way back, my professional interest is in ways that new technology, demographic changes, globalization are disrupting ways of doing business. And nowhere is this more evident than in the world of entertainment, where everybody is trying to figure out how do we commercialize digital content? How do we take these properties that capture everybody's imagination and turn them into entertainment spectacles and keep that fan enthusiasm going so that we don't burn people out?
Well, I mean, with 130,000 people, I mean, I want to pull up some video from Comic-Con that you actually shot, just to show sort of the phenomenon. You would think that everything is all right, but as I'm reading your book, I'm feeling like it's kind of like it's the best of times, it's the worst of times with Charles Dickens, that things have never been better, but there seems to be some trouble around the corner at the same time, maybe because of this disruption you're talking about.
Sure. Comic-Con began as a gathering place for the kind of people that you were talking about in the opening, the traditional comic fans who didn't get out much, and this was their chance to go and meet the creators and meet each other and talk about their stuff. And over the last 20 or 30 years, it's really turned into this pop culture singularity that's taken over the city of San Diego. It's spilled out into the streets. These are some shots from the early moments of the con when people are really enthusiastically bursting onto the floor. When this is at its height, you cannot move through these aisles. There are people surging and packing the hallways.
Who are these people, though? Are they you and me, or are they real? They're not the obsessives, as you say, right?
Well, comics culture has gone from being a niche subculture into being synonymous with pop culture. When you see a show like Big Bang Theory, which is #1 rated sitcom on CBS, and all of the characters are sporting the logos of the DC Comics and superheroes and things like that, and they talk about it as if it's real life. We've broken down some kind of a barrier so that this is no longer subculture. This is mass culture right now.
What happened? How did we go from niche to mass culture? What happened to comics specifically that brought that appeal, that universal appeal?
It's a confluence of a number of things, and this is kind of what I was getting at in the book, that this story of how this art form moved from the edges of culture and business into the center of both worlds is really rather remarkable. One of the most single causes that you can think of is that special effects technology got better. So these cheesy looking superhero movies that you got in the 70s and 80s that never quite connected, suddenly when you get really good CGI and you can see the X-Men and Spider-Man and Iron Man and all of these characters, the way that you envision them in your mind when you're reading the comics and capturing that kind of imagination, suddenly that art form that appealed to a few people that went into comic stores and read these stories is up there on the big screen, and everybody's going to see it.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, obviously Hollywood played a large role in that. For those who take comics seriously, is Hollywood a curse or a blessing?
Well, it's brought a lot of money into the industry, and that has helped preserve some of the existing properties as is. I think if it were just up to single issue sales, if you were a fan of Superman or Wonder Woman or those kind of things, those sales have been going down pretty dramatically. And it's the money that's coming in from these other media, from licensed properties, that's keeping the traditional medium afloat. But the other thing that's happening is there's a new seriousness in comics happening on the art side. And there's a lot of really interesting literary storytellers and graphic artists and people with no connection to this nerd-oriented comics culture who are using this medium to tell much more ambitious kinds of stories. And this is happening at the same time that the Hollywood is taking off. So you're getting cultural value and commercial value.
Well, that's really
colliding.
interesting. And it strikes me that Hollywood's been essentially mining or maybe squeezing to death stories that were developed in a very different time, especially from the 1930s when Superman, we're talking about fascism happening in Europe, the Depression in the United States, gangsterism, all that kind of thing. That was very specific, and somehow they just keep going back to that in sequels and reboots and whatever else. And it doesn't strike me as particularly original or authentic for our time that we're sort of relying so much on another period.
Well, it's become our cultural mythology. There's a lot of talk about how American society is fragmented into all of these micro markets, and there's political tensions that divide us. When you walk around the floor of Comic-Con, none of that is present. All of these people are there representing very different socioeconomic classes, very different potentially political views, and coming from different parts of the country, and all sharing their enthusiasm for these stories, for these properties. And so they may seem a little dog-eared and old-fashioned, but they're one of the things that unites us. And actually, incidentally, that's one of the things that made the events in Colorado with the shooting around the Batman movie so tragic, because going to these kind of communal events and celebrating our popular heroes in this way is, it's almost sacred, and to violate that space was pretty bad.
That's really interesting to me, because obviously that universal appeal is almost like a water cooler moment or culture for us to talk about, especially in this fragmented world. You mentioned Batman. You would think, and I found this the most sort of startling part of your book when you were talking about cycles in American history and culture and how they repeat themselves. You would think that with comics and with America, Superman exemplifies America at its best, but we seem to be in the era of Batman, this depressive sort of tycoon who's doing good things but always sort of the underdog at the same time. Why does Batman beat Superman now? Or is that going to always be the case?
I mean, it's been going in these cycles, and people have different theories about what appeals when. I mean, Superman appeals to our desire to transcend. He is the outsider who, through his good actions, redeems himself in the eyes of society and becomes a hero. Batman is the exact inverse of that. He's basically an entrepreneur, right? I mean, Bruce Wayne is a self-created character. He's taken the tragic hand that he's dealt and turned it into a story of redemption and revenge. And I think it sort of maps to some of the larger things that have been going on in the American psyche over the last 10 or 20 years.
What does that mean then, basically that's been part of the psyche of America, and we do go in these cycles, as you pointed out? Does that mean Superman still has a chance to redeem himself and come back into our culture?
I think so, and I think that when you see Superman starting to come back, one of the things that's going to indicate, for example, is an embrace of immigrants and our multicultural heritage, and the idea that the outsider from the deepest regions of the outside, he's from another planet, right, can nevertheless rise to become the emblem of United States, of truth, justice, and the American way. And when you see that happening, I think it's an embrace of a broader conception. Batman's kind of a narrow conception.
Sounds optimistic to me, but I suspect we got a long way to go, because we have a president who embodied some of those, and that didn't go so well so far.
And he's a big Superman fan.
Yeah, well, for good reason. When we return, we'll ask Rob Salkowitz if there's a chance of a sequel. We'll be right back. We're back with Rob Salkowitz, author of Comic-Con and the Business of Pop Culture. Well, obviously, Rob, the book has done quite well, and it continues to do well, and comics still remain part of that cultural conversation. Is this your primary sort of concern right now, or are you working on other things?
Well, actually, wear a lot of hats, and the the story of Comic-Con and what's going on in the entertainment world continues to be fascinating. But people say, what do you think is the new direction for this stuff? And it goes back to some earlier work that I did around globalization and the democratization of ideas and innovation. And that was the theme of my last book called Young World Rising. So what I've been doing since the book came out is going and looking for some really cool stories around the world of people using the medium of comics and the storytelling format of comics to embrace their own cultural ideas, to use it as an entrepreneurial platform for new kinds of entertainment development, things like that. So I've had some really cool conversations
It
lately.
would strike me that that's actually quite challenging because you're looking at culturally, contextually specific stories. How are you able to bring your very specific North American worldview and sort of say this is universal and can be used for educational purposes in other countries?
What's being used for educational purposes all over the place, and there's an increasing body of work about the educational value of comics in the classroom. Why? Because it's a really simplified storytelling format. But the other cool thing is for something like language training. With language training, traditionally, you're either watching a video or you're listening to tapes or you're doing classroom instruction, and you're missing the context of the whole story of what's going on. If people can see in one page some of the social indicators, an older person talking to a younger person and the tone of address that they would use versus people talking peer-to-peer, things like that, and you get a broader story behind it, actually the language acquisition is a lot better.
And you've actually indicated, I've got the app up on my iPad
Yeah.
right now, something called Dim Sum Warriors. What's that about?
So this is one I came across in New York. I was talking to the creators of this. It's a couple from Singapore who now lives in Queens, New York, and the principal person behind it is an educator at SUNY Stony Brook, I think. And her idea is to create a digital comics app that teaches
Enter the Dumpling.
Enter the Dumpling, right?
That's great.
That teaches Mandarin language to English speakers and English to Mandarin speakers using this universal language of manga-style comics.
So I see everything's in English. Where am I learning Mandarin? I guess I need to...
If you press and hold the
Oh, wow.
you get the translation and the transliteration, and there's actually features in here that will read the text back to you in the proper intonation. And it switches so that your primary language can be in the Mandarin, and then it brings up the English. So if you're a Mandarin speaker and you're trying to learn English, but it's very simplified, it's very story-oriented, and it's fun.
It's pop culture, too. You can see Play-Doh and Yum Magazine, Better Walks. It's very funny at the same time.
Well, the story is engaging. I mean, they don't make it like an Eat Your Vegetables kind of educational comic book. It's actually fun to read on its own terms, even as it's packing this payload of educational value and really cool digital innovation.
What does this tell you in terms of being able to engage people, especially young people, and you talked about that in Young World Rising, what does that tell you in terms of what is required to engage them? Are we moving to this more visual world where we have to move away from text and books and to something that's more compelling?
Well, one of the features of the digital media environment that we're in right now is it's so rich and there's so many options, and that if you were to take something like an iPad or a digital device and use all of its capabilities with all of the rich interactivity there, people's heads would blow up. You need a front end to it that people can get their mind around. And there's nothing more accessible and inviting than comics. It's illustrated, it's simple, it's familiar. Everybody can read them. A lot of people can create them. And using this as a way into this new media environment, particularly on a device like a tablet.
So basically comics tied to smartphones or
Yeah.
tablets. These screens actually do matter. These aren't flash in the pans. These actually makes things more accessible is what you're saying.
Yeah, and as we move into a world, I was reading, every time I read the estimate of how many tablets there are going to be in the world in 2015 or 2016, the number goes up. I think it's up to 770 million. This is going to be the way that people get their information in the very near future. And we're still groping our way toward what's the native format for a tablet. And I think it has a lot to do with comics.
So it's accessibility plus connectivity. So it's actually helpful to actually have that connectivity to other people through cell phone or Wi-Fi.
Yeah, you can
whatever
embed
else.
social features, you can embed all kinds of audience engagement techniques in it, you can put a lot of functionality in the background. As long as the way that you approach it is still that familiar faceplate, I think that's a really powerful combination.
Because I imagine most people have been thinking that maybe this tablet thing is just a fad, and this conversation about the post-PC era is not quite the one we should be having. But there's something different about getting rid of the keyboard, it seems, that sort of makes it more accessible. I haven't quite figured out what that is. Is it because it's more tangible, or there's more of a touch involved with it?
I think the jury's out about the tablet in a lot of scenarios for enterprise, for content creation, for things like that. One place the cake is definitely baked is for presentation of digital media.
Got it. Well, after the break, we'll help extend Rob Salkowitz's reach. Rob Salkowitz, media strategist and serial entrepreneur. Let's see if we can apply some Four Peaks therapy to your challenges. So, Rob, right now you obviously got the book, but you're also doing something else. You're collecting stories from around the world. How's that working out?
Well, I'm sort of groping my way toward the next project. I feel a little like a Ferrari stuck in city traffic. I'm yearning for the open road, and I'm trying to find it. And I'm just sort of casting out in all directions right now to find the good stories, to find what people care about and what's happening next.
So how do you go about doing that? I mean, so you're looking for that story that's going to resonate and says, oh, that's my next project, right? Is that how you're thinking about it?
Well, I'm trying to unite these two different platforms, this idea of entrepreneurship and innovation coming from the edges and the bottom up instead of the top down, which is present in the Comic-Con book but is more in Young World Rising, and this new mode of storytelling and where it's going and the things that it's telling us. So I'm looking for great stories about the uses of comics, not just in education, but in technical training, in marketing and communications, in journalism, in political activism, in all kinds of different ways. And it turns out that a lot of the coolest work in all of those areas is happening outside of the United States.
Well, that's interesting. So could you, I mean, obviously we're moving into a very networked world in terms of how we can make those connections. Are there organizations or specialists in these different places where you can actually go and sort of say, this is what I'm doing. I'm basically trying to figure out how to teach entrepreneurialism through these different methods. Can I tap into your network to say, this is my credibility, this is my expertise. I will share my findings with you along the way if you give me some feedback. Is that sort of a nice quid pro quo?
Yeah, that's usually what I try to do, because there's lots of smart people out there in the world that are specialists in these areas, and just talking to them for a few minutes is a real education. The other day I was on a Skype call with a young woman who specializes, she's the curator of the Istanbul Comics Arts Festival.
They have comics in Turkey?
They have comics in Turkey, but in Turkey I discovered from Janan that the primary use is for political criticism and ways to get around traditional press censorship, because, as she points out, a lot of the politicians don't know what they're looking at with a political cartoon.
So there's great subterfuge going on, right?
The primary employer of cartoonists in Turkey is political newsweekly magazines, and they get a lot of their serial pop culture entertainment from imported from Europe and the United States.
Well, that's amazing to me that that's a completely different language that the establishment or the institutions can't grasp, but somebody else is using it quite effectively. But in terms of entrepreneurialism, whether or not you're using a graphic method to convey that, can you even teach entrepreneurialism?
Well, I'm trying to figure out the ways to do that. I mean, that I've been taking some of the ideas that I heard from a lot of other people when I was researching Young World Rising, ways particularly to blend commercial entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship into sustainable money-making enterprises that also create social good, and turn that into a curriculum. So I'm working actually with one of my UW students on ways to do that as well. What the connection is between that and some of the comic stuff, again, it will appear to me someday, I hope.
So from comics to emerging markets and these amazing changes that are happening now, is it fundamentally caused by demographics, especially overseas, this young world rising, as you say?
Yeah, the theory in Young World Rising is that we know about the procession of generations in the world, from boomers to Gen X to millennials, and we attribute all of these characteristics to millennials about how they're collaborative and how they work together on things and are digitally oriented.
Is it true?
Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. But one thing that's kind of interesting is that countries that have a demographic balance that weights young behave like millennial countries. Behave like millennial countries, And organizations founded by millennials tend to embody millennial values in their organizational structure and
So
in their DNA.
is America a millennial country? Or I imagine Germany is not. Germany's got a demographic crisis. China is actually facing one too.
Exactly.
What's America?
Actually, America, it depends on which America you're looking at. The immigrant America of new Americans, that's where the youth is happening, and that's where some of the ideas are coming from. We're counterweighted. We have very strong, older legacy institutions that are sometimes a source of strength and sometimes hold us back. So the jury is very much out on America. Some of these other places don't have those kind of legacies, so it's a lot easier to break through with great ideas.
So if we were to look at the world right now and say, I want to totally tap into a millennial-focused country, which country would you choose?
India.
India?
Yeah. A lot of great, interesting stuff going on in India, and for all the problems that are taking place there, this is a place where the young generation is seizing on the widespread availability and falling prices of technology, the great cultural endowment that they have of the different visual and storytelling styles, and the opportunities of global entrepreneurship to create something new.
Well, I've already learned something right here, but you know what? We'll be right back as comic book guru Rob Salkowitz tries to teach me yet another thing or two. Rob, thank you.
From jet travel to software to medicine, this place has given the world some big ideas. A lot of that has to do with this place. Over the past 150 years, the University of Washington has fostered one of the most creative cultures in history. And today, it's where a new generation of leaders, thinkers, and doers are changing the world again. If you have talent, curiosity, and desire, discover what's next.
Four Peaks is made possible by generous support from Weber Shandwick.
So now Rob Salkowitz is going to turn the tables on this college professor and teach me something. Rob, what you got?
Well, I want to show you, these are called mini comics. And before we were looking at this great interactive app that's sort of at the high end of what's possible, these are the single-celled organisms of the comic ecosystem.
These are the amoebas of comics, right?
Exactly. These demonstrate, when we talk about comics being an accessible medium, these are basically handmade items. They're created by artists. They're sold at tables at Comic-Con. This is a pretty sophisticated one. This artist is an award-winning artist. His wife is a novelist, and they put this together. He has done much more larger scale work than this, but he chose this format because it was a really interesting way to tell this particular story.
It's attractive.
You were talking about that maybe you don't...
I'm a terrible artist.
Terrible artist.
Don't make me draw.
So this is not a barrier to creating mini comics. If you look at some of the work in here, all you need is a story.
My daughter could do this, and she's 4.
Exactly. I started doing mini comics when I was a kid. It's a very easy way to do it. Here's one.
Can you show me the example?
Yeah,
Can you show me what to do
I
right
can
now?
show you what to do right now. So basically what you do to create a mini comic, all you need is a pencil and paper, fundamentally. Basically you start with a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Fold it again, and this actually gives you the genesis of a booklet. So if you were to chop off the top here, you would have page 1, page 2, page 3, etc. So when you fold this out, it gives you a way to draw this. You would draw your cover and your back cover on this side. Then you would turn it upside down, do your other pages.
And you're saying I can do stick art, and basically by doing it
can
this
do
way,
stick
it's
art.
kind of like sequences. I can see where I'm going from
Yes.
one frame to the other, essentially.
So basically, if you were going to a Comic-Con, you would take this to a Kinko's, do a 2-sided copy, have your friends over for a late night party with the pizza and beer and a straight edge ruler, start folding, start cutting, start stapling, and in the morning you've got a whole bunch to give away.
I can totally do this.
Right on.
Rob Salkowitz, author of Comic-Con and the Business of Pop Culture, thank you very much for joining us. We invite you all to extend your reach by connecting with us at 4peaks.org. I'm Hanson Hossein.
Production of Four Peaks would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors.